Ever feel like the economy is this like big mysterious thing? Like we hear all these terms thrown around, but who actually knows what they mean?
Right, like it's this giant machine that we're all part of, but we don't really know how it
Yeah,
works.
exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into trying to understand at least some of it. We've got a stack of notes here.
We do. A lot of information on market structures, labor,
Mm.
even what happens when things go a bit wrong, like economists call that market failure. You've probably experienced most of these things firsthand without realizing it,
That's so true.
like from buying a cup of coffee to even just landing your current job.
Yeah. So our notes start by breaking down all the different types of market structures. Like, who knew? There are names for everything from your local farmer's market to those tech giants, you know the ones.
Oh yeah, the ones that seem to know what you're thinking before you do.
Exactly.
But really, understanding these structures is important because they directly impact the prices you pay, even the choices you have as a consumer. It even impacts the pace of innovation.
Huh. I never thought about it like that.
It's like the difference between buying, I don't know, needing a dozen eggs
Sure.
versus needing the latest gadget.
Okay, I get it. So,
Yeah.
like, completely different.
Completely different ballgame.
Okay. Speaking of eggs, our notes actually start with farmers selling milk
Okay.
as like a classic example of perfect competition. So, like, lots of sellers, all with basically the same product, just competing on price.
Exactly. And you can think about it like going to your local grocery store. Like you've got tons of options for milk,
Yeah.
but they're all priced pretty similarly, right?
Yeah, they are.
That's perfect competition at work, basically, keeping those prices low.
But then less variety.
Right. So that's the trade-off. Like, don't go looking for an oat milk latte at your average dairy farm.
True. Okay, so if that's one end of the spectrum, then what about the other end, like monopolies? Our notes actually mentioned Ireland specifically taking steps to prevent these.
Yeah, and it makes sense. Monopolies can be a big problem for consumers. Imagine if only one company sold cars, they could charge whatever they wanted because you'd have no other option.
Oh, that's a good point.
Right. That's why governments, like Ireland in this case, often step in and they try to prevent monopolies from forming.
So it's about protecting the consumer and making sure there's at least some competition out there.
Exactly.
Okay. Our notes also talk about monopolistic competition, which honestly sounds a bit like having your cake and eating it too.
It kind of is, in a way. So
Yeah.
you have a lot of companies, but they're all selling products that are similar but slightly different.
Okay.
So think about like clothing stores.
Yeah.
You got tons of them,
Yeah.
but each one is trying to cultivate a certain image or a certain brand to convince you that their jeans are cooler or their dresses are more stylish.
This is like more about marketing than anything else.
In a way, our notes call this brand proliferation, essentially just this like explosion of brands all vying for your attention.
Which is usually through advertising.
Exactly.
Like, have you ever, like, felt personally swayed by a clever ad campaign?
All the time.
Me too, especially, like, on social media. It's like they know I want a latte right before that coffee shop ad pops up.
Oh yeah, they know, they know.
Targeted ads are scary. Okay, last one, I promise. What about oligopolies? Our notes describe this as, like, there are a few big players who kind of control the whole game. And they mention something called sticky prices.
Right, so in an oligopoly, think about something like gas stations. You'll notice their prices tend to all move together.
Yeah, that's true.
That's because if one company drastically lowers their prices, the others basically have to follow suit or they'll lose all their customers.
Oh, so they could start a price war.
Exactly, which could actually end up hurting everyone. So instead what you get is this sort of careful dance.
Where everyone's kind of afraid to make the first move.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so the prices stay, relatively stable.
So they're all stuck in this pricing tango together.
That's a good way to put it.
This is fascinating stuff. This whole deep dive into market structures, it's got me thinking, what's my role in all of this?
Well, that's a perfect segue into our next topic, the labor market. Because whether you realize it or not, you are a key player.
Okay, so we're all players in this economy game. But how exactly does this whole labor market thing work? Our notes use this phrase, derived demand, which kind of makes it sound like we're all just robots or something.
It does sound a bit impersonal when you put it like that.
It does.
But it basically just means that, the demand for your skills, your labor, it's all based on the demand for whatever it is you produce.
Okay, that makes more sense.
So like if there's a huge increase in demand for, say, electric cars,
Sure.
the companies that are making those cars, they need more engineers,
Right.
more mechanics, more salespeople. suddenly those skills are in high demand.
So the more those companies need to hire, the more valuable our skills become.
Precisely. And that's where our notes get into all this MPP and MRP stuff,
Yeah.
trying to put an actual number on how much output or even how much revenue each additional worker brings in.
It's like we're back in economics class all over again.
A little bit.
But hey, knowing this stuff probably helps when you're negotiating a raise,
It
right?
definitely doesn't hurt.
Yeah,
I mean, understanding your own value in the marketplace, that's crucial.
that's true.
Have you ever, actually sat down and thought, okay, what skills or experience could I gain that would really boost my MPP, my MRP?
And now that you mention it, maybe I should brush up on my coding skills.
There you go.
But it's not all just about how much you produce, right? Like, our notes also mention the risk involved in a job, the specific skills needed, even how much society values certain professions, you know? All of that plays a role in how much people earn.
You're absolutely right. It's a very complex mix of factors.
It is.
Some of them are pretty straightforward, like highly specialized skills.
Right, like a brain surgeon.
Exactly. Or a pilot. Those are always going to be in demand.
So they're going to make more money.
Exactly. Because there's only a limited number of people who can do those jobs. But then you have those other factors that are a little bit harder to pin down. It's like, why do certain professions get more respect or seen as more prestigious? Why do we just assume accountants deserve a good salary? It's not always obvious.
That is an interesting question. It's fascinating how much those perceptions, actually influence things.
They really do.
Our notes also touch on this idea of a backward bending supply curve of labor, which I'm not going to lie, that sounds like something I'd hear in a yoga class.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's actually a pretty interesting concept. So the basic idea is, most of us, we're happy to work more hours if it means earning more money, right?
Sure.
But at a certain point, that desire for leisure time, for family, for personal pursuits, it starts to outweigh the allure of an even bigger paycheck.
Like our free time becomes more valuable than even more money.
Exactly. And that can actually have big consequences for economic decisions on, a larger scale.
Wow. I never would have thought about that.
It's true. Speaking of big economic decisions, our notes go into this whole debate about minimum wage laws.
Oh, yeah, that's always a hot button issue.
Always. And it seems like such a straightforward way to help workers, right?
It does.
But our notes actually present some pretty compelling arguments for and against raising the minimum wage.
Right, because it's not as simple as it seems on the surface, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, you want to make sure that everyone can earn a living wage.
Of course.
But our notes also bring up the point that if you raise the minimum wage too high, it might actually lead to businesses hiring fewer people.
That's true. I've heard that argument before. Because then their costs go up.
Right. And then they have to figure out, okay, how do we offset those costs? And sometimes, unfortunately, that means letting go of employees.
It's a classic example of, even when you have these well-intentioned policies, sometimes they can have unintended consequences.
Exactly. And that, if you think about it, leads us perfectly into our final topic, market failure.
Market failure. Okay, that sounds kind of scary.
It does, doesn't it?
Like the whole system is about to, crash. Our notes make it clear that it's not quite that dramatic.
No, not at all. It's more like, hiccups in the system.
Okay.
So market failure happens when the normal forces of supply and demand, they don't quite lead to the best outcome for everybody.
So not a total crash, but definitely not ideal.
Exactly.
Got it. So our notes list out 4 main types: public goods, asymmetric information, externalities, and monopoly power. And we already talked about that last one, but let's unpack the other 3 a bit.
Sounds good. Let's start with public goods. Our notes use the example of lighthouses, which seems kind of random.
It does seem random.
But it actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about it. Everyone benefits from a lighthouse, right? Even if they've never actually paid anything towards it.
That's true. I've never paid for a lighthouse.
Exactly. And that's like the classic definition of a public good. Something that benefits everybody, regardless of who actually pays. The problem is, because anyone can benefit from it for free, there's zero incentive for a private company to actually build one or even maintain one.
Because who's going to pay for it?
Exactly. Our notes call it the free rider problem.
Ah, okay, so without the government stepping in, we'd all be lost at sea. Well, metaphorically speaking, at least.
Right. Well, maybe not lost. But it just shows how certain things, like lighthouses or streetlights, often need the government to step in to make sure they actually exist. The free market alone probably wouldn't provide those things.
Makes sense. Okay, what about asymmetric information? That one's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. But all it really means is that in some transactions, you have one party that has way more information than the other party.
Okay.
And that can lead to, outcomes that aren't really fair.
So, like, what? You mean like when you buy a used car and the seller knows it's a lemon, but you don't?
Exactly. You're stuck hoping for the best.
Ouch. So information really is power.
Right.
Or the lack of it can really cost you.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, last one, externalities. And our notes use pollution as the, like, classic example here.
Yeah, it makes sense because pollution is basically a cost, but it's a cost that often spills over onto people who have absolutely nothing to do with creating it in the first place.
Okay.
So like if a factory pollutes a river, everyone who lives downstream from that is going to pay the price.
Even if they never bought a single thing from that factory.
Exactly. So it's kind of like those hidden fees they tack onto airline tickets.
Except with, like, a much bigger impact.
Exactly. And because those costs aren't factored into the actual price of the thing being made, it can lead to, well, people over-consuming things that end up harming the environment.
This has been fascinating. We've explored the ins and outs of all these different market structures. We unpacked this whole labor market thing and even shed some light on those tricky market failures. I feel like I learned a ton.
Me too. And it's amazing how it's all connected, isn't it?
It really is. Well, that's it for our deep dive into economics. Hopefully this is giving you a lot to think about too. Until next time, keep those economic wheels turning.